Welcome to the 2021 Masters of the American West Wildlife Sculptors Breakout Sessions with Dan Ostermiller, Tim Shinabarger, and Marjorie Torrey. Dan Ostermiller's bronze sculptures. The Lynx. And The Safe Place. Tim Shinabarger's bronze sculptures. Out of the North. The Wild Horse Island Ram. Taking a Break. And Wapiti. And last but not least, Marjorie Torrey's sculptures. Face to Face, bronze on marble. Quail Hunt, bronze on black marble. Bunny Love. And finally, Mystic Warrior.
So thank you all for joining us today for this conversation with Tim Shinabarger. My name is Ben Fitzsimmons and I'll be the moderator. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box or use the reaction button to raise your hand. And you can then, when I call on you, you can then unmute your microphone or turn on your video and talk directly with Tim. Tim is a noted wildlife sculptor and a conservationist who most recently, the Autry was awarded the Bob Kuhn Wildlife Award in the 2019 Masters of the American West exhibition and sale. But this year, obviously we're doing this all virtually. So would you like to talk a little bit, Tim, about your work, the pieces that you have submitted this year? A little.
Sure. Welcome everybody, and thanks for taking some time out of your day. I'm coming to you from Billings, Montana, and as you can see, I've got my COVID haircut. My wife is a registered nurse, so it's been a bit of a crazy year, but we're sure looking forward to getting back together with everybody in the near future. I've been in the Autry show, I think about 17 years, and been doing wildlife sculpture and painting. Started way back in the 80s. I haven't been doing much painting now for about 20 years. I've been mainly focused on sculpture. I'm hoping to change that in the near future. I'd like to get back to doing some painting too. My wife and I take extensive trips into the backcountry all throughout really the world, but mainly in the West, Alaska, Montana, down to Arizona. I like to, I would say that my work, if it has a consistent theme, it would be wilderness and the wildlife and the land. And that's what I'm mainly focused on. I think that'll kind of get us started.
Great. And there's a sculpture behind me, which is one of the pieces available. Could you talk a little bit about this? I know there's
Sure.
an artist statement that goes with it a little.
You bet. That piece is called Wapiti. It is a bull elk, of course. And I've always been fascinated by the movement and mechanics of wildlife. And so a lot of times I like to do pieces that are animated. And elk have been one of my favorite animals. They live right here around us here in Montana, of course, and throughout the West. And mainly this piece, it was about movement, and I'm always experimenting with surface texture, trying to come up with kind of an abstract way of applying the clay to create a play of light and keep that movement going. I don't want the piece to feel frozen. And so that's kind of what the goal, I guess, in this piece was that movement.
Great. You mentioned shaping the clay. I have to say I'm not familiar myself too much with the steps that lead to making these bronze sculptures.
Sure.
Can you walk us through a little bit? I didn't realize there was clay involved myself.
You bet. In this particular piece, being that it is animated, I will actually sculpt. The armature follows the skeleton, and so there would be a wire, running where the spine is down through the legs, and I would actually build, kind of rough out the skeleton, and get the feel, the movement, and then start laying on the masses, the thoracic region, and kind of sneak up on it by building the animal from the inside out and getting the proportions, getting the movement, getting all that first, and then tackling that surface, that play of light towards the end. And I use a fairly soft clay. It's heated. I have a heater that starts in the morning at 3 o'clock, so that when I get to the studio, it's nice and warm. And that clay will be, at about 70 degrees, it's soft. At 100, it's liquid, and at 60, it's hard. So there's quite a range, and that'll change the application and how the clay looks as you're laying it on too. So lots of variables to mess with. And then I work with all kinds of different tools. I'm always trying different things, trying to come up with different ways to create textures and a look. One of the ways to think about it is a rough texture will absorb light and smooth will reflect it. And so you can create a lot of life in a piece just through thinking about it almost like a painter: accents, halftones, and highlights.
Great. And in the chat, I see a question. How many castings did you use for the elk?
That one is an edition of 24, if I remember right. It's almost sold out. There's probably about 6 left. I try to do enough to cover my shows and galleries, but yet try to kind of keep a piece somewhat rare too. And I also don't want to spend all my life in the foundry, and I oversee every casting, and so I try to keep that number kind of right there, kind of find a balance of enough to supply the demand, but yet not so much to take up all my time in the foundry.
Okay, it looks like he said, I meant how many pieces are used to put it together in the foundry? So what are the stages to take it from the clay sculpture to what we see here?
Sure. This piece, it is, I'm trying to think, the head comes off. If anybody that's familiar with the casting process knows that these are hollow. We want the casting to be a nice, even, about 3/16 inch thick. If there's a thicker area, the bronze, when it cools, it will distort into that area, because the last area to cool will create a pull. So that the inside of the piece is actually hollow. And so we take the head off and cast it separate. It's cut right across the front shoulders. And then I think the antlers are in about 4 pieces, and the base is separate from the body. So, probably about 7, 8 pieces. And all that has to be welded together, back together using a bronze rod and a Heliarc TIG setup, which is a welder that you can control the heat. And so you can be real creative and how you lay the metal down. And so we can get my texture back almost with the welder. And then we do touch it up with tools, grinders and things that resemble dental burrs and that type of thing.
I see why you don't want to spend all your life in the foundry. It's a lot of steps to make each piece.
For the last 20 years, I've spent about 4 or 5 days a month in the foundry. And I'm hoping to, basically what I'm doing right now is I've kind of gotten to a point in my career where I'm cutting back to just probably a couple sculptures a year and doing more painting. I want to do, when I'm out in the field, I really miss capturing the weather and that type of thing too, not only just animals. And so we're getting back to doing some field work as far as painting. And this coming year, last year we were in the thoroughfare region of Yellowstone for 3 weeks with our horses and mules. And this coming year, we're going into the Canadian Rockies for 28 days. And so that's the type of field work I do. And like last year in the thoroughfare, I saw a lot of elk. We actually had elk in camp at night and literally went to bed hearing elk bugle almost every night.
Wow, it's a beautiful part of the country as well. I'd love to spend 28 days out there in the Rockies.
Well, it's taken a long time to get to this point, but that's always been my goal, is to be able to take real extended wilderness trips and then to come back and to create art based on what I see and experience on those trips.
That takes me beautifully into another question. So do you take photographs, sketches, your memory, combination? How does that work for the sculptures and even the paintings as well? If you don't carry everything with you.
It's a little bit of everything. I carry a SLR that can take stills and video. So I do carry the camera, and then I carry a sketchbook, and then of course if I'm painting, I want to get little field studies, 10 by 12 type paintings, little paintings on location. But as far as the sculpture goes, in a piece like this, I really do construct it from all these different references. I don't have a picture of an elk that's trotting like this. I just have this idea. I've seen elk do this, and they have that kind of head high gait. They kind of remind me of a camel, actually. And so then what I'll do is, I'll have a concept that I saw out in the wilderness, and I'll gather all the reference. I'll get skeletal measurements, all the photos of details. I've worked from elk in zoos where I've done studies. It might just be hoofs and legs and heads and that type of thing. And I'll gather all that reference and then build the piece. Basically, it's kind of a construction of all those references brought together. But drawing is the foundation of everything. It really is.
Yeah, that's quite the multi-stage process to create this. Another practical question here. This is from Christy Hennessy. It always amazes me when I see sculptures that are perfectly balanced on small contact points to the foundation. Can you talk a little bit about that and the working of the balance for that sort of thing? Sure.
Yeah, that's really, what this piece is about, is trying to create a feeling of where the elk is floating. And it takes a lot of, as I build the piece up from the skeleton, it's always amazing. There's almost this domino effect. You put a piece of clay on at one end and it affects the other. And so you're constantly nudging it back and forth, putting on, taking off, getting the anatomy right, but yet also keeping that, finding that balance. And a lot of that comes from just understanding too how the animals do move naturally, as far as where a hoof is placed under their center of balance. But then there's also the casting issues. You got just two small little points connecting into the base and into the main animal. And a lot of times what we will do is we'll run stainless steel rod through the legs to strengthen them, to make sure that we don't have any troubles like in shipping. We don't want anything getting broke. So, but it's a lot of push and pull getting it to all work out.
I really need to be able to share screen rather than just lean out the way so people can see the balance there. So I know that you have a background in taxidermy as well. You have a lot of knowledge there. It sounds very much, when you're talking about the armature and the balance points and the steel rods, is there a lot of, did you get into one or the other first? Did they sort of come along together?
Well, actually, taxidermy is, it's quite a while ago. I started doing that when I was a kid and up through college, and then the sculpture kind of took off. But there's a lot of similarities in the sculpting of a taxidermy mannequin. Is basically a clay sculpture that is then created and made into a form in which then the hide is stretched over. So a museum taxidermist really does a lot of the very similar way of working. It's just that I move on then to thinking about the play of light, and of course working out those proportional differences between doing something miniature or even monumental compared to real life. As a sculptor, as a clay sculptor, I get to have way more fun than a taxidermist. So they're really limited to making it look exactly like life. We get to interpret, and I'll actually, I'm thinking about editing as I'm working on the piece and accentuating different parts of the anatomy to create design within the piece, within the animal itself, and picking up. There's so many natural lines within an animal that are beautiful, and I'll pick those up and accentuate them, and then downplay others, and that'll help to create the movement too. But the taxidermy goes back to when I was a kid. Yeah.
Great. I definitely, one of your other pieces, which I'll pull up now. Let's see if I can pull this one up. The Wild Horse Island ram really made me think of the mention I saw in your bio of the taxidermy.
Sure.
Very...
This piece has kind of an interesting story. It was a commission for the Wild Sheep Foundation, and Wild Horse Island Island is a island in Flathead Lake up here in Montana, and the island is about 2,500 acres, and it's one of the last Cayuse Prairie, I think they call it. It's a very untouched habitat. It's very natural as far as the prairie grass and whatnot that's growing there. And there's been a small herd of sheep. Well, there's no hunting and no predators, and so the Fish and Game use it as kind of a nursery herd to then transplant sheep to other regions. And I think so far there's been about 500 sheep have been transplanted from that island. And this ram grew there, lived there for, I think he died about 5 years ago. There's lots and lots of photographers. Everybody knew about him. They were all taking a boat ride out there to see this ram. And of course, it's a state park. And so when he died, the game wardens picked him up, and he now resides in the capital in Helena, and the Sheep Foundation, because they're very involved with these transplanting these sheep, commissioned me to do this bust as a fundraiser, and then also I sell. Of course, I get to sell some for myself. But the funds that we raise from the sale of this piece are going into habitat enhancement on that island. So it's kind of returning, putting some back. So you bet.
So this sort of work you do, supporting conservation of in this case, the sheep, the rams, do you do a lot of this? It sounds like something you're very involved in.
Yes. As I was telling you earlier this morning, I actually had a 3-hour Zoom meeting with one of the conservation organizations that I'm a member of. I think I'm a member of about a dozen, so yeah, I'm a little carried away. But yeah, I think it's just kind of part of if you love wildlife, you're going to be attracted to the natural history. And along with that kind of comes the weight of the world as far as, there's a lot of headwinds out there as far as different things, as far as habitat and whatnot. And so you want to, as an artist, I feel I need to give back and try to work towards, wildlife enhancement and there's just so much I could go on and on about all the different things, and that would be depressing. So, but there's a lot of great things going on, a lot of good things happening. So, you bet.
Yeah, I saw in the artist statement for the previous sculpture, the elk wapiti, that you talk about the reestablishment of the elk. So that sounds like a positive story to me.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. There's if you go back to 100 years ago, when I was a kid growing up in Montana, there was probably about a third of the amount of elk there are now. So yes, there's lots of very positive things, and then there's the invasive species and weeds and all that type of stuff that's the negative. But and then of course just all just more and more people all the time. But yes, there's a lot of great, and that's what's so it's just fun to inspire people to love wildlife, and that way hopefully they will be thinking about it when they make decisions in their life as far as being out and about. And
of course, as you said, the piece you did, the ram, is a part of a fundraiser. So does that apply to much of your work? Does that contribute? Do you do a lot of fundraiser with your art?
Yeah, I would say most every year, probably a half a dozen pieces are sold at auctions, for fundraisers and that type of thing. In the case of the sheep bust, that one is kind of ongoing. And one of the enhancements, they want to do a natural burn on that island. And so that's going to be raising some funds, and there's other mechanisms in place too, where they're raising money. But I try to do everything I can.
Excellent. And does that apply to these ones that are available through Masters, or are these separate to that because it's through a different institution?
Yeah, most of my work. This one just happened to be a commission, and I generally don't do commissions. I don't have time, but in this case, I wanted to because it was kind of a special project. But for the most part, I just support wildlife conservation just as part of my career.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's beautiful stuff, and to have the story behind it and the importance of the conservation. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to ask, either in the chat or out loud. And of course, the artwork is available on the Autry website, the Masters website, by 5 p.m. This afternoon. So in just 30 minutes will be the end of submissions for acquiring one of these pieces. So you've talked a lot about the many different sort of steps to make the art, and the 28-day trips you have to do into the wilderness and everything. Do you go out looking for specific subjects, or when you're out there, you're inspired? And then how long does that sort of take to result in one of these pieces?
A little bit of everything. Usually it's the country that attracts me. I'm really attracted to vast wilderness areas, and then the wildlife that just happens to be there. Like this year when we go to the Canadian Rockies, it'll be elk and moose and bighorn sheep, grizzly bears. Last year was kind of the same because we were in the Yellowstone ecosystem, but it's mainly wanting to see these real wild areas. And then a lot of times I'll see, sometimes I'll see something, I can remember one particular case of piece that ended up resulting right away. I saw a grizzly bear digging Arctic ground squirrels in Alaska, and I did a piece literally right away the next year. I got home, I couldn't wait to get to it. Other times ideas will gestate for, I mean, I've got so many ideas, like I wish I had more time. And so these trips, I'll probably take I probably don't need to go on any more trips. I should just stay in the studio and work. But that's really, that's what really gets you excited. And like I said, it just generally I'll see something. I don't necessarily have anything in mind when I head out there, but I'm just taking notes and doing sketches and a lot of times even just sometimes it's just a flicker, basically a real quick something you see an animal do, and that'll come back to me, or I'll jot it down and then start working on it or thinking about it. One of the things I'm trying to do is, as time goes, is to have more and more pieces going at once, and to kind of rotate and to have maybe a dozen sculptures, and that way I have time to contemplate them as they're coming together, and to look at them with a fresh eye. Some artists like to work, basically start a piece, go right through to the end. I prefer to have lots of different pieces going at once. And so some pieces will be around for a couple of years, and other ones will maybe come together fairly quickly.
And what is quickly when it's with all these different elements, all the parts? So from when you start shaping it, what is quickly if you go from start to finish on a piece?
Just let's say that caribou that's in the show, that piece probably took about 2 months if I were to add up all the hours. It's that perfectionism, it drives me crazy. And so there's a lot of tearing it down, building it up, try this, try that. Generally I'd like to be more optimistic about my time, but I would say a couple months for most any piece. It seems like, and that's why one of the reasons why I want to work on more pieces at one time. That way I don't get stale. And so like that elk piece that you just had up, I would say that's about two months of if you took just the hours. And I work pretty much all the time when I'm home. When I'm out in the backcountry and stuff, that's my break in a way. I don't really keep. I just get up and go to the studio every day pretty much. So I love what I do.
Well, that's great. Another question I'm seeing here, somebody else is asking about how long it took, so I'm glad I got that one in. What's the most important thing that you feel that somebody has said or written about your work?
Oh my.
Or is there something particularly memorable if it's not?
One that's memorable to me because he meant so much. It was Bob Kuhn, who used to be in the Masters show. Bob's passed, and one time he commented that I was really able to put heat into the animal, the body heat. Life is what he meant, and that it just the way he said that, he says you're able to put some body heat into him. And that really was a great compliment that I've always cherished that memory.
That's yeah, and then a few years ago you got the Bob Kuhn Wildlife Award, which I know was named after him and is the main award in Masters for this. So another thing that you have, the title of this is Wapiti, and when you have the ram, which is a descriptive term, but then others, one we don't have an image of here, I'm afraid, is the out of the north. When do you choose a descriptive title versus one that is more atmospheric?
The Wild Horse Island Ram, I was kind of because it was a commission, I kind of had to just go with that. But I generally like one that's more like Out of the North, where it has more of that broad, feeling of I like to title a piece that gives you a feeling of the habitat and the country they're in, if possible. A lot of times I'll name a piece after a piece of geography, or like I remember I did a mountain goat years ago. I called Along the Head Wall. That type of thing, because I like to incorporate the habitat and the country into the design if I can, and also into the title if possible. Wapiti is actually, it's a Native American term, and means white rump. And it was a Native American term for elk, for our North American elk.
I see there's a hand up. David, would you like to unmute and ask your question, or is?
Yes. Hi. I'm fascinated with the thought of a 28-day expedition, and I'm assuming you take mules or something to carry everything. What type of artist supplies would you take on a trip like that? Do you use
Sure.
colored pencils, pastels, watercolors? What are you sketching with? And the camera is pretty obvious, but everything else that you would do on, because you run out of something, you can't run to the nearest artist store, when you're 14 days out.
No, that's for sure. We'll be taking, it'll be just my wife and I. She goes on all these trips, and we'll have 2 horses and 4 mules, and we'll be eating freeze-dried food. And I will carry a small pochade box with my oil paintings, little 8x10 canvases, and also a sketch pad with charcoal and pencil. And the paint, actually, the paint is kind of the real pain, because it's ground rock. You can't lighten it. And you also have to pack, turpentine and mineral spirits. I don't use turpentine, but mineral spirits. And so there's a certain amount of weight. And 2 years ago in 2019, we did 21 days in the Wrangels in Alaska. We flew in a bush plane, and we landed. And so it was really tough. The pilot looked at me like, "What in the heck are you guys carrying?" And it was the paint gear and the camera. Those are the things that you just can't lighten up. And with the horses and mules, it's not bad. We'll put roughly about 100 pounds on each animal. So we'll have about 400 pounds between food and gear. And we'll actually be quite comfortable for 28 days.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for that question. As somebody who backpacks, I was thinking the same thing. I would love to be able to take horses and mules, make my life much more comfortable doing that.
My backpack's usually way out of control. 75, 80, 90 pounds is a normal pack for me. And it's just, I don't get very far a lot of days.
Well, you're not there to go too far. You're there to enjoy the landscape.
That's for sure.
Speaking of which, you said that one of the reasons you want to go back and do more painting is because of capturing the landscape. Obviously, with sculptures, you can get an essence of the field, but not the landscape. Are you planning on doing? Well, can you talk a little bit about that artwork?
Yeah, I think I really enjoy observing the weather and the atmosphere. And I used to paint. I painted till about the year 2000. I split my time half and half, but I just found that it was just about, I was kind of getting scatterbrained trying to do it all. And now, sculpture is like looking at an animal from 1,000 directions. You're seeing all the silhouettes. And now I feel like I understand the animal so well that to draw them, I don't feel like my hands are tied anymore. When I painted before, I really felt like I needed a reference showing me the animal at a different, at each angle. And now I can make the animal up in my mind. And I think it'll really be it'll make the act of painting there'll be a lot more freedom to take a landscape that I'm inspired by and then put the animals into that landscape and make, to design them and have it all work, instead of starting the other way around with the animal and then trying to make a landscape around it. And so it's a tall order. It's like starting a second career, and but I'm really enjoying it. I've been painting now since the Alaska trip, at least 2 days a week, and I don't have anything that I want to put out on the market yet, but I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm feeling really good about it. I just wish I had more hours in the day.
So I was going to say we should snap up your sculptures now, because soon you'll be doing just paintings.
No, I hope sculpture has always been my first love, and my hope is that I would, still do 2, maybe 3, a year, probably 2. Like I said, you figure, and if the piece has multiple animals, of course, it takes a lot longer. And so you can easily see where I would still spend, half the year doing sculpture even if I only do 2. But that will allow me not to be in the foundry as much. And there's so much with sculpture. There's so much other time that's spent, just in getting the patinas and getting in dealing with all the shipping and everything. It's just a much bigger operation. And so I think as time goes, I consider retirement being able to paint. And I'm 54, so I've still got a ways to go. I got lots of time, but I figure I better get with it if I'm going to do it. So.
Yeah, that would definitely be a lot less physically demanding, I think, if you're doing the painting in retirement.
I just took on a big commission for a 9.5-foot tall doll sheet piece that's going into a lodge up in Alaska from that last trip. And so I'm thinking, okay, what happened? So I've got a very busy summer ahead.
So I was going to ask, what do you do when you're not sculpting or painting? But it sounds like you don't have any time other than that in the trip.
I'm riding my horses and mules. I'm actually training 2 new mules right now, and so at least 2 or 3 times a week, I'm out. I've got a pasture that I ride around in this time of year because of the snow, and I'm hoping not to get bucked off. But yeah, so we've got horses and mules, and that really is our time away from art, is spending time with them.
Speaking of horses, actually, there's one piece that I have a background for here that I haven't brought up. Is this one of yours? One of your own horses?
No, this was another commission. I've had a couple of commissions, talking about with the sheep piece too. I don't do many commissions, but I kind of wanted to wrap up a few before I started getting back into painting. And this was for a really good old rancher friend of mine, and he'd been after me for years, and it was his horse. And I thought it would be a great study to try and capture the exact character of his horse, and just a really great exercise in I love horses, and so I went ahead and basically it was a commission for my good friend Ed Fryer, and I thought, well, I might as well cast an edition and sell some, but really that's what it's all about, and he was very happy with the piece. So I probably won't do that. Yeah, anytime you do somebody's personal pet, you're out on thin ice. So dogs and horses, kids.
Yeah, you see those people who have the paintings done of their animals, and it looks nothing like their animal. So yeah,
they have a mental image. And this, a horse especially, the horse was about 34 years old. And of course, he wanted me to do him when he was younger. And so he gave me lots of photos to look at. The only way I saw him as a very old horse, and so I had to kind of trying to imagine him younger and then still capture his attitude. And Ed says I nailed it. That's all that matters. So
he would know.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's a question. Do you have any? What advice would you give to any young aspiring artists who particularly would like to work in bronze, but also I will expand that out and say any young artists? Do you have any advice?
I think that I had a really good mentor, Hollis Williford, and I think that's real important. I think to get to know some of the older artists, and some are really good at teaching and others aren't, but I think that's to not try to just figure it out on your own, but to get to know. We're all good friends, all of us in the artist community. We're constantly talking, and it's amazing how much you'll learn from each other. And so I think that's really important to seek out artists that you appreciate their work, and to learn as much as you can. You don't know what you don't know, and I would give anything to be 20 years old with all what I know now, and because I feel like it's lifetime's just not long enough. It takes 40 years to figure it out, and then now it's become a lot of fun. It's really a pleasure to work, because things actually happen the way you want them. Where early on, for years, it's a struggle, and so to seek out that help is a really important thing, I think.
And I know from being at the Masters physically, there's definitely a community. It seems amongst all the artists, you all seem to be very close to one another in many ways.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that there's a competition, and really there's not. I think the artists we all thrive on looking at each other's work, and we're inspired, and it's a feel-good business, and everybody just, it's such a nice community of people, and it's just a great thing to be a part of.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. I know the notification is about to come up and say that we'll be leaving. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the audience? Would you like to, is there anything at all you'd like to say that we haven't got to in the conversation?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to check out everything online this year. It just feels so weird. I feel like you're all off in a little room in California and I'm on Montana, but it's hard to imagine everybody's off in their own house. And I'm sure looking forward to when we can all get back together, and just appreciate everybody sticking with it. And it was kind of a crazy year, and actually it was kind of interesting. The art world, I feel like it actually was much better than I thought it was going to be, as far as people, I think they sought out art as a way to feel good. And so it's been really a good experience as far as that goes. Can't wait to see everybody in person, though. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that is one of the things with the live experience as opposed to these virtual ones, is getting to, as you said, have a community of artists and friends who are part of it all. But yes, I want to thank you as well for taking the time from your foundry to come and join us all today on this conversation that is very, very different to the in-person experience. But I know that people are looking to support artists, and if you haven't yet done so, as I mentioned earlier, the ballot process for acquiring one of these pieces ends in about 10 minutes. So once this conversation is over, if you go to the Masters website, you can submit your ballot, and there are many pieces available. And as Tim said, to support the artists that we all love so much in a time that's been difficult for everybody, and of course to support the Autry in a time when it's been difficult for us as well. So thank you for coming to this. And before we end, because I think we have a minute or two, I just want to sort of ask, you talked a little bit about Bob Kuhn before, and your mentor. Are there any current artists that you particularly are inspired by?
Oh, sure. Quite a few people right there in the Autry show: George Carlson, Matt Smith. There's a lot of us that it's like an old homecoming whenever we go to a show, and that's what we're really missing. But yeah, there's actually some of the artists working today are as good as there's ever been, and there's truly some master artists out there, and so I always can't wait to see in this case the website, and see what everybody was working on for the past year, and it's very inspiring and humbling at the same time. You bet.
Great, wonderful. Well, we can head back to the main room where there will be a tour of the miniatures, I believe, is the next one. And you can also, as I said, go to the Masters website and put in your ballot for one of these pieces, including the ones that Tim has talked about today, where you get to really know some of the story and have the piece. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Tim. This was great. This was fascinating. I want to learn more from you personally about all these trips to these places in the wilderness. I have to get myself a horse and mules.
You bet. Well, thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.